So I've opened the file of the 3 leaves from my website here in Photoshop, and to create a custom stamp and brush, what you first have to do is select the area that you want to turn into a brush. So I'm going to just grab my quick selection tool and start selecting out one of these objects. You can use any other of the tools that you'd like. This one happens to work pretty good when there's good contrast between the edges and the background. And I'm holding down Option and going back into the areas I didn't want it selecting, which it seems like there were a couple up here. This might have been a little faster with the magnetic lasso. I wouldn't know unless I go back and check. So there's plenty of tools that would work, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time making a really refined selection. I'll let you do that on your own. So essentially I have the area selected that I want to make a brush out of. As soon as you have the area selected that you want to make a brush out of, you can go to Image and, Edit Menu, and choose Define Brush Preset, which should be available. If for some reason it's not available and you're doing this with another picture, it might be because there's too many pixels in that area, but this one works great, so I'm going to hit Define Brush Preset, and I'm going to come up with Leaf 1 as an example. Alright, deselect and hide that layer, and let's just paint on the background and see what happens. So grab your brush, scroll all the way to the bottom of your brush presets, and choose the new leaf brush that you just made. You can see that this is big. This is quite large. It is the size of that original leaf, and if I click once, I can see that it's in grayscale. Now, if I choose a color, like I want to do a red leaf, and click again, it will only do it in that color. It's not going to retain the color of that original leaf. So what Photoshop really does is it looks at everything in grayscale when it creates a brush. So I'm going to back up a bit to where I had my leaf actually selected. And this time, instead of just making a brush, I'm going to copy this, so Command C, and make a new file, Command N. I typically will create my stamps quite large in the 1000 to 1500 pixel area. Let's do this one at 1500 pixels by 1500 pixels. 72 dpi, RGB is just fine, and then click OK. When you paste, you've got your object here on its own layer. To see it how Photoshop sees it, it's actually more useful to be in grayscale mode, which you could set when you make that new file, or later by going to Image Mode Grayscale. It'll ask you if you want to flatten things. I would say don't flatten, which will leave your layers the way they are, and then discard the color information. So this should look familiar, just like the leaf that we just stamped. What we want to do is increase the contrast so that there's actual black layer areas and white areas. So I'm going to come up to my Image menu, choose Adjustments, and Levels. Grab the black slider and move it in until things start turning black, but stop before things go so black that you're losing a lot of detail. And then on the white end, you can pull that in just a little bit. Reason being is Photoshop will create your brush, and when you stamp with it, it will put down 100% paint where it's 100% black, and where it's 80% gray or black, it'll only put down 80% of paint, and where it's perfectly white, it won't put down any paint. That's what Photoshop really looks at. So you can adjust things in here. You can also get your dodge and burn tool and go in and darken up areas if you feel like they're too light. And again, try and keep some of that detail, because that's what will make that brush interesting. Now you can tell that I did a really sloppy job selecting this. The edges look really ugly, so I hope you'll take some more time when you're doing this to get a good selection. So I'm remembering that anywhere I put down plenty of black, it'll get lots of ink or lots of color. Okay, let's turn this one into a brush and see what it looks like. So it's usually a good practice to select the area that you want to make a brush, Actually, because there's nothing else on this canvas, if I told it to define a brush preset, it would take only the pixels that are showing. So let's go to Edit and choose Define Brush Preset again. And this is Leaf 2. Now this is a grayscale document, so it won't do me much good to show you how this applies color. So I'm going to come back to my leaf document up here and hide that and make a new layer. So I've got this great big white background, and scroll down to the bottom of my brush presets and choose my new leaf and click with it. Make a new layer, grab the other one that you made the first time and click with it, and you can see the difference between these two. And you could even swap the order of the layers, so the faint one is on the bottom, and you can see that the new brush is less transparent, it's more opaque. That's essentially the basics for creating a pixel-based image. Is Photoshop will look at the amount of black in it and create a brush. And that can apply to images. It can also apply to shapes. You might have noticed in your brushes there's not really a square shape anywhere, even though there are some you could load. To make a square brush shape, all you need to do is grab your selection tool, select an area, fill it with black, and then go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. And it will do the exact same thing that we've done so far. It'll create a single image, and you can brush around with it or go into the brush panel and change its settings. So now that we've said that, let's create a brush that will let us create a pile of colored leaves just with the click of a button. I'll show you how useful this can be. First off, let's grab the second leaf that we did. So this is the one that had more contrast to it. And pick a couple of fall colors for your foreground and background chips. So I'm going to get a pretty bright red and then also a yellow that's quite bright, and click OK. And then go to your brush panel, which if you have your brush tool should just be to your right here. So you can see down here, here's our brush, and the first thing we want to do is go to Brush Tip Shape and change the spacing so that you can see the individual leaves. Next, click on Shape Dynamics, and I'm going to reduce all of mine back to the original settings here so we can walk through one by one. Size Jitter will change up the size of these stamps every time it goes down. And the minimum diameter will limit how small those can get. Angle Jitter is a good one because it'll put all these at a different angle. And then Roundness Jitter will make it so they're not looking like they're all lying on a flat pavement straight below, that there's a little bit of an angle on them. Flipping the X and Y Jitter will bring in even a little bit more randomness. So let's test this out. You can see my brush is pretty darn big. That's great for a stamp, but for a real brush it's kind of a good idea to size it down maybe to about the 200 pixel area. So I'm holding Option and Control and clicking and dragging and watching my diameter setting there until it's about at 200. And now if I click and drag, you can see what sort of brush you've made. If you like the way that looks, go ahead and save it off as a new brush by clicking up here in the right top and saying New Brush Preset, and you can call this Leaf Pattern Brush maybe. But we're not done there. Let's do a couple more settings. Click on Scattering and increase the jitter on that so that they spread out, and maybe even the count. Don't have the count so high that it looks like a colored mess, but so that when you click and drag you'll be putting down a lot more leaves. The next one let's do is Color Dynamics, so click on that. First off, increase the foreground background jitter by quite a bit, and let's try this out. If I click and drag once, you'll notice it's an orange. It's blended my foreground and background colors, and then if I let go and click again, I'll have a slightly different color. So every time I click, I get a slightly different color that's between those two, and the higher I crank this jitter, the more difference there's going to be between those as I click and drag. Alright, I'm going to clear off this background layer here. I hadn't realized I was painting on my background. This time I'll make a new layer and then get my colors back here. Alright, so we're back to where I was. However, we want to have this colorful pile of leaves at the click of a single button. So we can apply the setting per tip by checking the apply per tip. And now if I click and drag, I should have a whole bunch of really colorful leaves. And that's how you can do a fall leaf brush. If you play with the hue jitter, the saturation jitter, and the brightness jitter, you can get even more color variety in there. Once you've got it exactly the way you want it, go ahead and save that brush preset. Here we go, new brush preset, and I'm going to call this Fall Pile of Leaves. Okay. So that's great. I've made several brushes and I have a couple of stamps. And my definition of a stamp is one where when you look at the thumbnail it just doesn't look like anything attractive. It's just the shape being repeated over and over. A brush is one that there's been some settings applied to so that it will do specific things when you click and drag with it. If there's any there that you don't want, hold down Option, which will turn into a pair of scissors, and you can click on one to get rid of it. Like for example this top one, which was the first leaf we created that was way too light. Next thing to do, once you've made a whole bunch of leaves or a whole bunch of brushes that you want to save, click up in the brush preset panel setting and choose the preset manager, and then click on one, hold down Command and click on your other brushes and save it as a set. So click Save as Set, choose a location, give it a name, Fall Leaves, and hit Save. So now you've done it. You've created your own file of custom brush leaves.